Hello, everybody, and welcome to the beginning of our Literary Bootcamp, where we're going to learn how to close read some short stories and do some analytic writing together before we move on to our novels, where we're going to apply those skills in the real war of trying to tackle novels. Okay? So before I get going and blab it about stuff, answer this question for me. What is a story that has just stuck in your memory that really touched you in some way and made you think? Why did it strike you so strongly? Details, good. Make sure to give me details. So let's talk about the agenda real quick. I'm hoping this takes about 4 weeks, no more. But it depends on you guys and what your needs are. We might do it more quickly, or we might have to take a little bit longer, but generally about 4 weeks. Okay, we're going to be focusing on different purposes of reading as we go through our boot camp here, so that we're kind of focusing in on different skills. So when we read the novels, we kind of have that tool belt ready to go and to tackle the big stuff, because any good story is going to have all of these things. But and you can look for, it can be very confusing to look for different things. So we're going to focus on just one thing at a time, or a couple things at a time. Okay. So first we're going to do plot and structure. Later on, we're going to do characterization, theme, point of view, symbolism, allegory, and fantasy, which we kind of already have started with Plato and Half a Day. Then humor and irony. We'll do philosophical lenses at some point in the future, and do some new criticism methodology later on when we get to poetry. Okay, we'll have to break up poetry bootcamp for another time. Okay, we'll do that in between books maybe. Okay. And then when we're done with our short story unit, what you guys are going to be doing is writing a group analytic essay. I know some of you might be thinking, what? A group essay? Yes, a group essay. You need to have those conversations to thinking about writing. It really does help you become a better writer to have those, not arguments as in fight, but those kind of conversations where you're trying to figure out what's best to be done here. How should I phrase this? What kind of evidence should I be using? And just all sorts of other kind of writing questions to have to work through and think about what is it we're trying to say. So your first essay with me is going to be a group essay. Okay, and I'll be assigning the groups, and we'll be working on that later. And then we're going to have, of course, this culminating activity at the very end where you're able to take all of these skills, read a book, annotate it, analyze it, talk about it, and then write on your own an essay about that book. Okay, and even some blended essays about multiple pieces at once. Okay, and that will be either on the Albert Camus' The Plague or Lord of the Flies, depending upon the class. So the first thing we're going to do is plot and structure today. Okay, and I know a lot of you guys know a lot about plot and structure already, but we're going to be adding some things to that and looking at it maybe a little bit differently than you've looked at in the past. Okay, so I'm sure you all have seen this kind of 5-point plot that looks kind of like a mountain. We've got the exposition, the basic situation where you're learning the world that you're in and you're introduced to the characters, and then something happens and you start going up that mountain of rising action. And then there's some turning point, which we also call climax. So I think turning point's better because it really has more to do with you can't go back. Everything's changed, and that's leading towards that conclusion. So it's the moment that leads to the conclusion, and then there's that falling action that's inevitable that falls towards the ending, the resolution, or the fancy French term denouement. Right, and I'm sure you've heard some other things like flashbacks and flash forwards, and even about stories that have multiple storylines going on at once, so it's kind of messy. It's very nice to talk about these things, and it's important to understand, how stories are structured, but that's not quite as important as what they do. It's not really profitable for our adventure here and trying to understand the meaning of stories and how they're connected to us by just kind of pointing out, this is the exposition, this is the rising action, this is the resolution. We're beyond that. Okay, we're done. We're moving on to bigger things like the function of how the plot helps us understand the meaning of the work. and why authors specifically structured the story in that way to help build on that meaning. A lot of times plots will be parallel with some point. It's not just a stylistic trick because it's neat. There's some meaning in there. And so we're going to be looking at the effect and the meaning that the plot and the structure of the story has. So it's a little bit deeper layer of digging on this. You know how to identify these things, but we're going to go further. So plot is something that there's a, just like all human beings, authors go from being not very good to being fantastically amazing on that skill. And skilled authors carefully present a sequence of events in a significant order. We assume that these pieces we're reading that are what I would call capital L literature, they put it in a certain way on purpose. We're assuming there's significance there, okay? We can't read their brains, so we're just going to assume that there's a significance there. So when we're analyzing plot, you want to make sure you're not just, giving me a retelling of the events. That will kill your score in your essay, and that's not what matters here. You're not summarizing the story for me, like first this happened, and then that happened, and then they all died. That's not what we're doing here, okay? You're not retelling me the story because guess what? I've read it. I'm very familiar with it. What I want to see are the gears in your brain turning, showing me what meaning and the thinking and the questioning that comes out of the result of that plot. I want you to be looking at meaning, not just labeling parts like we talked before. Here's a silly kind of example here. So here's this is plot summary. The king died and then the queen died. That's it. Okay, you're just telling me events. You are not telling me anything about the meaning of why the king's death was significant to the death of the queen, right? That's just story summary, and that's going to kill you, okay? So I'm sure for some of you, we're going to have to break you of that old bad habit. It's not your fault. That was a skill that was necessary in the past, but now we're moving beyond that, okay? So what I want more is like the king died and then the queen died of grief because of his loss, right? So we're talking more about trying to understand her grief. It's more about the significance of the loss of the king on the queen at the end, right? We want to talk about significance, not just details, okay? So what matters is the causal connections, right? Plot, when it's all connected and there's some kind of purpose for why this happened and this happened and this happened, there's no filler, there's no fluff, it's all significant, right? If the story is full of fluff, that's probably not literature. It could just be fun commercial stuff, but it's not the capital L literature that we're talking about, okay? So you don't want to confuse plot with content, right? Plot isn't the action itself. It's not the first this, then that, then that, then that. It's the way the author arranges the action towards some specific end, right? Almost all authors, they write backwards. They think about where they want to go and they figure out how to get there so it makes sense, it's significant, and it helps add to the meaning of the piece, okay? Now, commercial fiction, like let's say just Marvel movies. I'm not saying Marvel can't have some literary graphic novels out there. They absolutely do. I would say DC's The Watchmen is one of the most literary things you could possibly read. But I'm talking about like the kind of popcorn eating, just silly fun stuff, okay? That doesn't really have a lot of complexity. Plots and that kind of stuff, the kind of super movies that are just fun, like the Transformers, the Michael Bay Transformer stuff, right? Those plots may have surprising twists and turns and may have some kind of culminating climactic incident at the end, right? That makes sense. Otherwise, bad movie. But the main goal, though, is just to keep you reading or to keep you watching. It's just to entertain you, not to not get you bored. They're just thinking to get you to come back into the theater and buy more tickets. And if it's Disney, buy more stuff and go to Disneyland and buy more stuff and buy everything, right? So it's going to be pretty conventional, right? We like the familiar. We like things that make us feel good and turn off our brains. And there is nothing wrong with that. But that's not what we're going to be doing in this class, okay? This class is about a different goal, okay? An example of what I'm talking about would be like Twilight, that book series. It was, a fun genre of books for people that like that kind of stuff. It was a page turner, kept you keep on moving. The plot just kept on moving, and it was just to get you to the next book, to get to the next book, to get to the next book. It was part of a franchise, right? It was just fun stuff. Most Stephen King novels, I won't say all of them, but most Stephen King novels tend to be also just page turners that are meant to entertain you and scare you. There might be some kind of moral lesson in there or some kind of like ethical questions, but that's not probably the main goal. The main goal is to scare. And again, nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we're looking out for here. We're going to, look for things that are a little bit different. A lot of literature we're going to be reading is not conventional, right? Because conventional means it's used a lot. It's like the standard, right? Like a lot of TV shows that people like, they kind of follow this formula, right? And that formula can be very comforting, but it can be not very evoking of thought. It's not getting you to question much. It's just mind-numbing fun. Okay, Star Wars, lots of fun. It's got some depth to it, the original trilogy, but it does follow this three-part structure. It's not breaking any structural kinds of cliches. It's very classic. He based it off Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, that if you were in freshman honors, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, that's okay. But it does follow this kind of cycle that's seen in so many stories. They're just kind of, you could just, it's like an algorithm that you could just plug in things and boom, you've got a story. Okay. We're going to be looking for more experimental and less predictable kinds of things that do unusual stuff. Okay. That are going to cause, that are going to have unusual character relationships, or going to have ethical dilemmas that are, these unsolvable problems, where there is no happy ending, there is no perfect solution, there is no, they lived happily ever after. And it might even be confusing. You have to read it a couple times, like the story you just read, Half a Day. That is not a usual plot. And we could talk about that when we get back together, okay? So what you want to think about is, what is the purpose here? Is it to challenge me? Is it to make me question things? Or is it just to kind of entertain me? Is it just for fun? That's going to tell you a lot about, how to analyze the plot and structure of a story, okay? So some examples of experimental structure. Pulp Fiction. This is a story that if your parents have let you watch, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to explain without spoilers kind of what I mean. In this movie, it follows many different characters. There isn't a clear single protagonist. It's like 5 little, what they call vignettes. These 5 different kinds of stories that are connected, and they do come together at points. But all the good guys are not really good. All the bad guys are kind of sympathetic. And the beginning of the movie is kind of towards the end of the plot, if you're going to put it in time. And the end of the movie is kind of the middle. So it's very experimental. It's all over the place. And it's what's called postmodern, because it's just so all over the place. And this movie changed a lot of movies. It changed how people thought about movies and kind of started its own kind of style. It was an important film because it was so experimental and different. Another movie that was experimental, again, no spoilers, but I'm going to tell you how the plot's kind of like, so you understand what I mean by talking about meaningful structure. This movie Memento, another one I'm not assuming you've seen. It's rated R. You'd have to ask your parents' permission. It's pretty intense, but what's interesting about it is that the story goes backwards. And it's not just a cute little thing. It has meaning. It's trying to help you understand what it's like to be the protagonist. The protagonist here, this guy right here that's covered with tattoos, he's had a brain injury. We don't know why, at first, of course, and he cannot process any short-term memory into long-term memory from the brain damage. So every day is a new day. He has his old memories, like he remembers his wife, he remembers the past, but he can't remember any new memories. So he's kind of like a goldfish. He's only got the day from, when he wakes up till he sleeps. And so we're kind of seeing things as they go backwards, because he's trying to make the audience feel what it's like to be him, to understand what it's like to have no idea what's going on. And so everything's this constant mystery. And that's why he has tattoos on himself. He's leaving messages for himself. So when he wakes up, he can further along the mystery of what happened. And so it is a fun kind of device to be different and to go, "Ooh, look at me, I can make a cool plot." But it also has a lot more significance to the nature of what it is, how memories are part of who we are, about who are we if we don't have a memory, um, and about that kind of idea of like wishing you could forget things, but do you, right? This kind of frustration of and limitations of our own experiences. So there's meaning in this. Another one that has to do maybe with complex character relationships with plot has to do with this another movie called The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and it's like one of the only serious Jim Carrey movies out there. Again, you'd have to ask parents' permission to watch it, and I won't spoil it for you, but just to explain to you how it's unusual and experimental and adds meaning to the story is this. This takes place in a not too distant future where we have this technology where we can erase specific memories. So no brain damage, but I'm going to take that memory out. Bing, so you can be happy and get over it as a kind of therapy. And I know a lot of us have had that question about, like, I wish I could just forget whatever that memory was. But this one makes you question, is that true? Are you sure that you want to forget those things, even the things that really hurt you? Aren't you made up of your memories? Aren't you the person you are today because of those memories? Who would you even be if we took out those memories? Would you be you anymore? And what happens is this girl right here, she and Jim Carrey's character are in a relationship, and we see it being over, like it's in the past. And he finds out that she has erased him from her memory, and he's so devastated she would do that, that she would erase him. He's so hurt. He goes to a doctor's office to get the memories of her erased, and we kind of go through his mind as he's losing her. This is a gif of another memory going away and him losing this beautiful moment. This defining moment of falling in love with her is going away. And he can't tell them to stop it because he's under, right? So it's this deep questioning. So the plot's very important. And like memories, they're all over the place. So it's not like this linear story. It's it's like how our memories are, how dreams are, right? And there's another movie that's very dreamlike. Again, ask your parents before you watch this thing. And this thing is so surreal, so much like a dream that, I mean, you can watch it 10 times and still kind of scratch your head and go, huh? But the director's trying to get you to understand just the feeling. And it is supposed to be a nightmare because he's trying to express the nightmare of this kind of internal conflict of being in a loveless relationship. So, and being kind of stuck in a marriage that you never wanted. So that's what I mean by plot connecting to the meaning, right? That kind of feeling lost and trapped in a nightmare. That's what this movie is doing with its plot, and it's totally connected to what it's trying to argue. Okay. So sorry I had to do all rated R movies as examples that you can't go and like run and watch, but it tends to be that high L literature movies are R because life is pretty rated R. So it is what that is. But next question I want to ask you is, and I want you to type in the little text box, what is the difference? Well, pardon me. What is the difference between analyzing plot and summarizing the story? Okay, so moving on to the next thing. Now we need to talk about like conflict, because that's part of the plot. That's what drives the plot, right? Is the conflict in the story. Otherwise, there's no story. Otherwise, you're bored. So conflict, there's a couple things, but there's this surface level of excitement, right, in commercial fiction. And then there's this significant meaning in literary fiction. Now, can literary fiction be exciting? Absolutely. Can commercial stuff have some meaning? Sure. But it all has to do with the kind of complexity of it all, okay? And so what's conflict? It's a clash of action or a clash of ideas or a clash of desires or a clash of wills. What I want isn't what he wants, that kind of thing, okay? And so characters can be in conflict in many different ways, and I'm sure a lot of this is review, but just in cases, we've got external conflict, right? There's some external force, like the outside world. It could be physical nature. That's that man versus nature, right? It could be you fighting a forest fire, right? Man versus society, like every single dystopia book ever, right? Is it anything that's a political story is about man against the machine, right? Of government or whatever, or fate, like with the tragic stories you've probably read from like ancient Greek stories, like Oedipus, if you read that last year, or Romeo and Juliet, right? So that's going to be some kind of conflict of a person against something outside of themselves. They've got some external outside enemy. And then there's the internal, right? That's fighting with yourself. And a lot of times, literary fiction tends to be heavier on the internal. And even if there is external, like Shakespeare's all external on one level, right? But then it's the internal that really matters. That's where the meaning is. It's not that Hamlet's really sad about his dad dying. That does suck. But it's more about him being such an overthinker and a coward that he can't move or do anything about it. He's conflicted within himself, like what kind of a son am I? So it's more about himself. He's his worst enemy. And because he doesn't move in time and he overthinks everything and he doesn't do what he needs to do, questioning everything, that he ends up, it doesn't end well, right? Not to spoil it, but it's a tragedy. And if you know about Shakespearean tragedy, just about everybody does not walk away in all Shakespearean tragedies, right? So it's about him. Yeah, his uncle's a jerk. Yeah, his mom's done bad stuff, but that kind of helps move the story forward. But it's what really matters is how that external conflict lets us see the internal conflict within himself. For those of you who don't know Hamlet, Lion King, same thing almost. Okay, except not a happy ending. All right, so it can be physical, right? Just like in real life, it could be a physical thing, it could be a mental thing, emotional, it could be moral, right? And it could be super easy and obvious, right? Like Avatar, it's really obvious. It's the alien blue people versus the greedy humans, right? It's very easily identifiable, clear cut. And then there's other stories that have multiple, that are interwoven, various kinds, maybe all four types: physical, mental, emotional, moral, internal, external, all that stuff. Sometimes they're so subtle that characters themselves don't even realize they are having a conflict, but we do as the audience, right? So you could be in conflict with other people, with social norms, as I said, nature, all that good stuff, right? And it could be all at the same time. It could be one of these or all of them, right? So those are and how that adds to the understanding of the story, what the significance is. That's what we're looking for. Okay. And the conflict has to be between some kind of protagonist, which is the main character. It does not mean good guy. It means whoever is moving the plot forward. Who are we following? Okay. They're central to the plot. Like the story wouldn't exist without them. Okay. And they can be sympathetic, like a character you like, or they can be unsympathetic, a character that you generally think's a turd. However, it doesn't matter. They're the main character that's driving the story. Okay? I'm sure you can think of a story where the main character is kind of a jerk and it takes a while for you to kind of like them, right? So it doesn't mean good guy, bad guy. Okay? And sometimes even there's more than one protagonist. Like with Pulp Fiction, there was multiple. There really wasn't one. It was kind of a mess, and they were all kind of messed up, not good people. Most of them were killers, so were gangsters, were thieves. So it was, it's not the good guy, man in a white hat versus man with a black hat cowboy story from the 1950s. And an antagonist, you guys, is anybody that's going against the protagonist, right? That's something that's in the way, and it could be a thing too. So it could be another person, right? It could be conventions of society. It could be things that are in their way. It could be, even the character's own character traits, the protagonist's own character traits. In the story Oedipus Rex, for those of you that read that last year, because he was his own worst enemy. He's the one that caused his problem. His hubris was his antagonist. He did it to himself. He thought he had an enemy. He thought that his brother-in-law Creon was like plotting against him. He thought Tiresias was, plotting against him, but no, it was himself and only himself. So that's kind of, and that's why it's such a classic story that's lasted for 2,300 years. It's something that I think all of us can relate to. Oftentimes, we don't really have enemies except ourselves. Whereas commercial fiction is like, kind of the cliche, good guy, bad guy Marvel story. Although, I will say, at times, like think about, Thanos. In the second to last movie, Thanos was a sympathetic guy that was just wrong. He seemed like he could be actually, in his core, a good person who's just crazy and misguided, right? And then the last movie ruined it, made him just a black hat bad guy, right? So they were on the edge of doing something great, and then they wussed out and messed up. I'm so sad. So there's a difference here, and the stories I'm going to show you, totally. You tell me, is this commercial or not? I hope it's not, but it could be, right? With literary fiction, there tends to be unclear moral lines. The best stories are the ones where it isn't clear, because that's life, right? So, next question I want you guys to answer in the text box is, I would like you to name an example of a movie or a book that you really know, that you think illustrates an internal conflict, a really good internal conflict. And I want you to explain to me how that conflict affected the meaning of the story. It could be any movie you like or any book you've read. So I just want you to try to show me you understand internal conflict. Okay? Details, please. Okay, moving on to suspense. Suspense is defined as the quality that increases the reader's curiosity and anxiety, right? Sometimes it's so intense you have to leave the room or pause it, right? It's that kind of building of tension, right? That's that rising action, okay, until it breaks, usually at that climax part, right? Less literary suspense tends to be kind of cliffhangers, so you watch the next episode or buy the next book, like murder mysteries and love stories, right? Nothing wrong with them. You gotta have junk food sometimes. Whereas a more literary kind of suspense that we're gonna be looking at is not what's gonna happen next, but why is the protagonist behaving this way? Why is he doing that or she doing that, or why are they doing that? Okay. So I'm sure you've all done that, screamed at the screen, either literally or in your head, like, why are they doing that? That's a more literary kind of question, not just first this happened, then that happened, okay? And another question you want to ask yourself as a literary analysis person when we're talking about suspense is, how is the protagonist's behavior explained in terms of human personality and character? Is this consistent with them? What does this help us understand about them? How are these choices letting us see something about that character's truth? And how are we going to learn through that character? Okay. And so forms of suspense can go all the way from crude to subtle. Like it could be the silly Scooby-Doo ripping off the mask and there was nothing that led to that, and why would you ever know it was that person, right? All the way to something that's really amazingly complex that you cannot stop thinking about. Okay. So it can involve actions. So suspense could have to do with actions that are happening. It could happen to do with psychological considerations, right? It could do with moral issues when you're like, oh my gosh, please don't do that. No, no, no. Why are you doing that? Right? Where you're worried about them becoming a bad person, or they're worried about them, going off the deep end and hurting themselves psychologically. And there's a couple of common devices that are used to build this kind of either psychological action or moral suspense. And one of them is mystery, right? That's part of what makes some books really fun, is not knowing, right? And then dilemmas. Dilemmas are something when there's no way out. There's no good answer. There might be a better answer, but there's consequences, right? So, and an example of a dilemma is there's a book called Kindred that I wish we could read. It's wonderful. You might read it next year if it gets approved. It's an American literature book written by Octavia E. Butler, who she is technically a science fiction writer, but this one's kind of like historical fiction with a little bit of science fiction in it. And it takes place, a girl, the only science fiction part is there for some reason she gets shoved back in time. It's a girl who's of mixed race. She's part white, part black. Most of Octavia E. Butler's characters are, because she was. And she gets thrown back in time into the South during slave times. And she has this moral dilemma because as she goes through her adventures trying to figure out, where she is and how to get along in life, she ends up on a plantation where she meets her great-great-grandmother. And she meets her when she's still pretty young, like a teenager, before she has her children that will then become, her great-grandmother, or maybe even add another great to that. And she finds out that it's through the rape of the slave master and her great 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 grandma, and she knows about it, and she has this information. Like, should I tell her? I love her. I know her now. I worry about her. Now we're like friends, and it's my great 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 grandma. Is it my moral duty to tell her that she's going to get raped by him? But if I do that, I don't exist. I'll die because I won't exist because I wouldn't have been born because I'm the descendants of that rape. What do you do? There's no good answer to that. I mean, there might be a clear moral answer of I it might seem like it's a clear moral answer, you tell, and that's what you got to do. You got to sacrifice yourself to save your friend and your loved one. But then what about the death of every single human being after that, or the non-living? All those people won't exist. Many people would be descendants of those descendants of those descendants. So are you a murderer if you tell, in a way? So those are those kind of dilemmas that make you like think like, what does it mean to be a good person? Right? It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it, but it is intense because of that the concept of rape in it. Um, so commercial fiction though tends to build on suspense to just kind of leave out information like Scooby Doo. Like they just don't tell you stuff, so it's not like there's some meaning in it. It's just trying to trick you, like some kind of like shell game or some magic trick, right? Um, and they just leave out the information. So like Agatha Christie, M. Night Shyamalan is famous for this stuff. And it's fun, but it's also like it's a one-time read. You watch M. Night Shyamalan once and only once because it's given away. I mean, you might like it and read it, watch it again, but it's not the same. You're not getting more out of it. You're probably getting less than the first time you watch an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Maybe twice just to see all the little clues that you missed, right? Um, but they're kind of obvious. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Signs, but I knew what was going to happen in the first 30 seconds of the movie, and it made my husband so mad. And if you want to know, ask me. I'll tell you how I knew. It has to do with water, cups all over the place. But they're just kind of cheap and fun, and that's it. They're a one-time pleasure read. They're not something like literary fiction that you could read again and again and again and get something out of it, right? And the suspense is less important. It's more important of the kinds of ethical dilemmas that come out of it for you to kind of think about. Like The Great Gatsby, it does have mystery to it, absolutely, but you could read that story over and over again and get something new out of it. Great Expectations, I don't know if you guys read that, but that's another one. There is a mystery about who gave me all this money, and it's because it's about this boy named Pip in the Victorian times who is very poor and an orphan, and his life is really stinky, and then all of a sudden he gets a bunch of money. He gets a benefactor, and he doesn't know why, and he doesn't know who, and he thinks he knows who it is, but it's a mystery, and then you find out in the end, but it's still something that has so much value in talking about the ethical and moral things that are going on and the conflict in the hearts of the characters that you could read it many times. Same Scarlet Letter also. And those are all books that you may or may not have read and will read. Okay. So are there any examples that you can think of books that have like more than a one-time read that have suspense? That really adds to the meaning of the story and that makes you want to like go back and think about it again and again or go back. Now, there's also an element of surprise. It's part of plot and structure and surprise endings to add suspense, right? And the surprise is always proportional to the unexpectedness, right? So it can have like jump scares are cheap, right? But there's other kinds of surprises that can really make everything fall into place and make sense. And they might be really unexpected, but then you're like, oh my goodness. And it really helps you understand the meaning of the story. But it tends to be this kind of like left turn out of nowhere if it's not really well done, right? But an example of good ones like Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, a lot of you read last year, right? That's a story like, oh my gosh, right? It's pretty shocking. But commercial fiction, they tend to have more than literary fiction, but literary fiction can have surprise endings, but it tends to be more earned and less, I don't know, it just seems less cheap. It feels more earned. And there's two ways to test the legitimacy or the value of a surprise ending. Was it earned or was it contrived? Contrived means like kind of like forced, right? Like you're like, what? If you find yourself going, what? It's probably cheap, right? So was it earned? And did it serve a meaningful purpose? Or was it just to be like, just to have a like glitter, just to show off? Is it to kind of solve some plot weakness? because they wrote themselves into a hole and they're like, well, I don't know how to get out of here, so magic, okay? And so it seems like this, oh my goodness, a surprise, but it's really just garbage writing, right? And so, did it subvert your expectations, right? But did you subvert the expectations so much that it ruined the story? That's a big question, right? Did it make sense? Was it earned? Does it help add to the meaning of the story? I would say the last Marvel movie, it ruined the depth and meaning of this part right here. Um, so, how is the element of surprise in fiction important to stories? Type your answer in the box. So, let's talk about the endings as we go towards the end of this lecture. Commercial stories almost always have a happy ending. And I'm sorry, but we're not going there this year. Our first book kind of does, but it's not going to be this kind of everything's neat in a bow, there's a wedding, everybody's happy, and the bad guy's in jail. That's just not how it's going to work, right? This live happily ever after all, where all the anxiety is resolved. Even the first book we're reading, if we're reading The Plague with me, depending on the class you're in, I'm not giving away the ending. I'm just going to let you know it's not like doom and gloom per se, but it's still not, I would say, all anxiety resolved. And we'll see how that works, okay? Literary fiction tends to end unhappy, at least somewhat, and there tends to be some kind of anxiety, some tension that never quite finishes because life doesn't. The only time it's over is when you're dead, right? It's rare, right? Like having pets. It's a beautiful thing. Never ends happy, right? Life is kind of like that, right? It's life is beautiful, but it's tragic too. So it seems sometimes literary fiction can be an obstacle for you guys who want that happy ending all the time, that want candy for every meal of the day, right? Because you think literature should be an escape, or you don't want to read anything depressing, or you think, well, life's not that bad. But are you cutting yourself short on what you could learn and feeling the full spectrum of life? Okay. So there's 3 justifications I'd like to give you for why I say we should be reading unhappy stories, or at least not fully happy. One's a fancy word, verisimilitude. This means that it matches life. There's reality to it. It could be totally science fiction fantasy where things are not realistic in like their points, but the feelings are real. Like there's this kind of, you can connect and understand, and it seems to like make sense. And it happens to be true with life. Most people do lose. There are few winners in this world, right? So it's realistic that not everything's this happy ending. And not perfect endings help us think. They force us to think about the complexities of life, to ask ourselves the big important questions, and to keep our minds, really going, and to not just numb ourselves. The literature we're reading is not to be numb. It's to rip the Band-Aid off and be open. Okay? Happy endings end and thoughts stop. That's not what we want. Okay? And I would say the third justification is that we don't learn much from good luck or winning. You got lucky. You learn when you make mistakes, right? Remember what I say, pathos mathos. About stories of hubris and tragedy, those are the ones we learn from, not from being lucky. There's nothing to be learned from being lucky, except maybe be thankful, right? Because you probably won't win next time. Okay. So in the text box, I'd like you to explain to me the difference of the effects between a happy, an unhappy, and an indeterminate ending, a kind of mix, right? This kind of both. What do you think might be the difference? In your own, like you just thinking about it, not me telling you, but what do you think are the differences of the effects between a happy ending, an unhappy ending, and a kind of a mixed, unclear ending? Last part here, we're going to talk about artistic unity. This essentially just means good plot. It's essential. Everything has to make sense and work together. Nothing should be irrelevant and fluff. Just like in your essays, I don't want fluff. I don't want irrelevant stuff. Give me the meat and only the meat, okay? They should all contribute to the meaning of the piece. And literary authors, they do this in the most effective way to get their point across. So, how is that way effective? How is the chronological order working for them? Is it chronological or is it non sequential? And how does that add to the meaning? Right? So, you know, there's some things though that can harm the artistic unity. I was kind of hinting that with the Marvel thing, with Thanos. Unjustified plot twists are known as plot manipulation, and this harms artistic unity. This unmotivated action can be one of them, like, that doesn't make sense for that character to do that. That's ridiculous. Or, that came out of nowhere. What's that for? Or this thing called Deus Ex Machina. This means God in the machine or God from the machine. It's this last minute, unearned, unconnected, arbitrary rescue from something like a genie or a magic spell or just some random thing that seems to happen that solves everything, but it's unearned. Now, it doesn't mean random things don't happen in real life, right? These just tend to be real cheap. It's rare for Deus Ex Machina to be good. It tends to make you go, wah, wah. What? Okay. For example, going back to Lord of the Rings again, if you are unfamiliar, spoilers, the end of it, Frodo and Bilbo, the protagonists, are on they're on this like rock. They're about to die. They have dropped the One Ring into, although it was actually Schmeagol that did it, but we'll let that go. The ring was finally dropped into Mount Doom, the only place it could be destroyed. So they're able to destroy the evil ring of power, so no one else would be tempted by it, and to save Middle Earth. And when that happens, the whole volcano erupts, and they're running, and they're trapped on this rock, and they're gonna die. In fact, if Tolkien had the guts, he would have killed them and let them die. But it's a children's story. He had to not be that dark. He had to use death in a metaphorical way for the good guys. So he sends the eagles. You can see them kind of here in the top right corner. The eagle, these giant, sentient, it means intelligent eagles, are sent by Gandalf the wizard to go find them, and they do. And they pick them up off the rock, and they rescue them, and they live. Here's a problem. If the eagles could go to Mount Doom, why couldn't they have taken the ring and dropped it off into the volcano and let it drop? Plot hole, right? The answer would be there'd be no story. But then there shouldn't have been eagles. The eagles ruined it a little bit. I mean, I love these stories, but the eagles are kind of like, I think everybody goes, yeah, the eagles are cool, but no, that was bad. They shouldn't have been able to do that. But he had written himself into a corner, right? They had to be saved, and in part had to do because it was an allegory for kind of Christian themes of being saved, right? So it makes sense if you look at it through a Christian lens. But if you're just looking at it as a popcorn eating movie, it seems kind of cheap. Okay. So chance and coincidence do happen, of course, right? That's okay, but it's when it feels unrealistic and cheap. Like, they got stuck. Okay. So it's gotta have, verisimilitude. It's gotta seem like that's something that would happen. Okay. But it can't be a crutch. Gotta be careful, right? If it's a crutch in solving problems that the author wrote themselves into, it's a bad story. Okay. It needs to not be far-fetched. It needs to make sense and add to the meaning. Okay. So is this a plot hole patch, or does this have some significance? So, almost last question here. How is artistic unity important in literary fiction as opposed to commercial fiction? How is artistic unity important? What do you guys think? So, let's go on with directions then. So we're going to try to apply some of this purpose for reading of looking at plot and structure, looking for those literary elements as we try to analyze the meaning of the story, called The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. He is Chinese American. He is bilingual. And he's actually famous in the writing circles for translating Chinese silk punk novels that are written in Mandarin and putting them into English. And the story is wonderful. Okay. And what I want you to do is use Cami again, and you're going to annotate um, each page with two what I call ARNs. So that means you're going to have to highlight some text, which is the what. Okay, because there's always a what, a how, and a why in our annotated reading notes. So you're going to annotate the what, the text you're talking about, and then you're going to, in the text box, type up the element of plot or structure that you noticed in this part of the story. Okay, and then the whys, which include your analysis and commentary about it and questions. I always want those all four things, okay? Because there's two whys. There's the you explaining the why, but then you continuing the story, not the story, but the asking of why else, right? So let me show you an example of what that is, okay? Oh, first of all, let me just tell you the things you can look out for. So when you're analyzing literary fiction, these are some of the things you might want to take a picture, and I will also put it on a Google Doc for you guys. The kinds of things to be looking out for your hows, for the lit devices of plot and structure. There's any of the 5-point plot structure, right? Of the basic, situation, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. But you want to talk about how it's in order or not in order, flashbacks, flash forwards, multiple interwoven stories, surprise or suspense that's in it. And then the other big kind of chunk is the conflict stuff. Protagonist, antagonist, internal, external, and layered conflict. Was the resolution earned or cheap? Was it ambiguous or mixed, right? Was the ending kind of this kind of, I'm not sure what kind of ending it was, or did I not even know quite sure what happened? Or was it clear? Was it believable, right? So these are the kinds of things you're going to be looking for in your hows. Now let me show you about what it all would look like, okay? So here's the very beginning of the story for you, the paper menagerie. It says here, one of my earliest memories starts with me sobbing. I refused to be soothed no matter what mom and dad tried. So that's the very first line of the story. I highlighted that part that says me sobbing. I refused to be soothed no matter what mom and dad tried. And then I added my little text box note. And you might want to interchange between different colors for yourself when you do this. But here's my little text box that has my how and my whys, okay? How? Internal conflict, right? About him crying, right? And he didn't want to, right? There's something about the will, right? So here's my thinking and my questions. Speaker is crying from the beginning of the story and refuses, keyword, to be soothed. Why is his first memory one filled with tears? Is this how we are? Do we only remember the sad, bad stuff? Why won't he be consoled? Does this imply he is stubborn, strong-willed, prone to sadness? Or that something sad is going on in his family? This sets a tone of emotional tension and creates an expectation of the character's future suffering. See, I'm kind of asking questions about meaning and significance to the character, and about making kind of maybe asking questions to help me kind of think about what's going on here. Okay? I would want 2 of those a page. Okay? So that's your assignment after watching this. Okay? And what I want to do is, when we meet up again, is to talk about the story. Okay? Because you got to be reading on your own, but talking together. Okay? I hope this was informative for you and you learned at least something new. I am going to put up a audiobook of me reading it, for those of you that need that. But I highly recommend that you just read it on your own if you can. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.